Good morning.
Good morning.
どうしようもない私が歩いている This is a haiku by a Soto Zen priest and haiku poet and severe alcoholic by the name of Santoka. I don't know if any of you have heard of him. He's a really, I think, interesting character. He was born almost at the same time as Kodo Sawaki. They're, I think, were born about 2 years apart. But they had very different trajectories, so Kodo Sawaki was born into a very poor family, but made a lot of himself, over the course of his life. Santoka was born into a rich family and lost everything and was kind of just a complete mess his whole life and died young. But his one kind of sort of remedy for his alcoholism was going on pilgrimage. So he would just sort of walk constantly, and there are maps available. You can see all the routes that he took. He literally walked all over Japan, similar to Kodo Sawaki, but for different reasons. And he also did the Shikoku Pilgrimage as part of it, sort of when he was getting started. So I'll talk about that. When I left the Senmon Soto, the training monastery in Japan, I'd been locked in this temple for 3 months, and I really just wanted to walk around. So I decided to do some of these pilgrimages that I'd heard a lot about for many years. So even before I started practicing Buddhism, I had heard about some of these pilgrimage routes in Japan, and had heard from people, non-Buddhists, who had done them and found them really meaningful. So I was curious about that. When I came back, I asked Todo-san, because I know Todo-san likes to walk, and I asked if he had ever done any of these pilgrimage routes, and he said something like, "Oh, I'm not a very good Buddhist." Which I thought was funny, because a lot of the people that do pilgrimages are bad Buddhists. And they're doing them to atone for some reason or another. So I'll just sort of jump to the middle of when I was walking the Shikoku Pilgrimage. The routes tend to go through cities, and that's where a lot of the temples are in towns and cities. So you'll sort of hit 4 or 5 temples, and then the route will turn into the mountains, and you'll spend a whole day ascending a mountain and maybe get to one temple at the end of the day once you get up to the top. And I was doing this in February and March, so kind of the off season. It wasn't like a popular time to be doing it. And so I was climbing up one of these mountains, and I hadn't seen anyone for hours. And then, in the middle of the woods, nothing nearby, and I start hearing this techno music. And I'm like, where is that coming from? And I continue walking, and there are these 2 guys who are, by Japanese standards, a little bit overweight, which by US standards, probably not very overweight. And they're just pouring sweat. They're wearing matching spandex outfits, and they have this portable speaker that's just blasting this music as they climb up the mountain. And I was like, oh, what's up with these guys? And as is often the case when you're doing these pilgrimage routes, you often end up staying at the same place as the people that you encounter while you're walking. So I ended up sharing a room with these guys later in the day. I passed them, but I asked them later, why they were doing the pilgrimage and what they do. And they said that they were the owners of a brothel. So in Japan, there's kind of it's not exactly legal, but prostitution still is a thing. So these guys were sort of atoning, I think, for the fact that they had this livelihood. And it was very interesting. That was one of the first encounters I had with some real sort of atonement. And it was the same with Santoka. He had this horrible alcoholism, and I think walking was both a way to kind of walk through it in one sense, but also sort of maybe atone for it. There are many reasons, though, that people do these pilgrimages, and that was one of the interesting things about it, was to talk to people about what their motivations were, but I'll come back to that. So my kind of objective today is to talk about the meaning of pilgrimage for modern people. So why we might want to do them today, even though they might seem old-fashioned, kind of old religion or something. just like, in our tradition, we try to understand why we want to do Zazen now as modern people. So that's one thing. I also want to share with you a little bit of some of the specific kind of cultural aspects of pilgrimage in Japan, because there are a lot of, these things have been going on for hundreds of years, so there's a lot of interesting culture surrounding it. And then, of course, I want to talk a little bit about my own personal experience. So I did part of this 88 temple pilgrimage on Shikoku, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that is. I did another one that was much shorter north of Tokyo in a city called Chichibu, which only took about a week. And that was 34 temples that all enshrine Kannon, so Avalokiteshvara. And then I also want to talk briefly about another one that I did here in the US, sort of. So right after I was ordained, I like I said, had been fascinated with this idea of pilgrimage, but of course in the US we don't have any tradition quite like that. But I liked doing long distance outdoor hiking. My family used to live right near the Appalachian Trail. And so I kind of invented this pilgrimage. So my Dharma brother Shoryu has a temple in Arkansas, Gyobutsuji, and there happened to be a number of long trails near there. So I started kind of near St. Louis and walked through the Ozarks for a little over 100 miles, and then I hitchhiked all the way across Missouri into Arkansas, and then there's a national river, which is basically the same as a national park, the Buffalo River, and I walked another, 50 miles or something, right to Gyobutsuji, because it's very close to this trail. And I think there were many similarities, actually, even though there was no formal cultural structure, of course, around that one. A lot of the same experiences came up. So anyways, I'll begin by talking about the Shikoku 88 temple pilgrimage. So has anyone heard of this before? So a few of us, yeah. The first time I heard about it was from an Australian guy who wasn't a Buddhist, told me that he had done it and really enjoyed it. And often, there's another famous pilgrimage in Spain, the Camino de Santiago, which goes to a famous cathedral, Santiago de Compostela. And a lot of people that do that also end up doing the Shikoku pilgrimage, because it's sort of like the next most famous one. So a lot of the Western people I encountered in Japan had done that. So here I have a bunch of things to pass around. There's lots of show and tell today. So this is a map of the island of Shikoku with all the different temples on it. Incidentally, between temples 64 and 65, that's where Todo-san went to his Senmon Sodo, Zuyoji. It's right on the route, but not one of the official temples. And just to orient you, Japan is sort of shaped kind of like a banana. And Tokyo is sort of in the crook of the banana. And then at the north end, you have the big island of Hokkaido, and at the south end, you have the big island of Kyushu. So Shikoku is kind of next to Kyushu, so it's sort of like south central Japan. So it's pretty warm there. It's kind of like similar to maybe southern Georgia or something, might be a comparison. But it's a big island. It's not like a little island. The pilgrimage route, I think it's about 750 miles to do the full circuit. So I'm going to hand that to you to pass around. Let's see. So when I did it, I didn't do the whole thing. I didn't have enough time. I was coming from the temple where I practiced in Kyushu, so I took the train to Okayama, which is near where Toshoji is, and then I took a train. And I just started kind of right where I got into Shikoku, so I think it was temple 79. You can see it on that map is where I started. And then so I went from 79 to 88 and then started back from 1, and I think I got to 23. And then there are an additional 20 temples that are kind of optional. So if you do all of those, it's 108, which of course we know is a famous number in our tradition. It's the sort of the number of defilements that humans are said to have. So the pilgrimage is sort of part of the Shingon Buddhist tradition. So Our tradition, of course, is Soto Zen, but there are many different types of Buddhism in Japan. They're all kind of interrelated more than they would present themselves. So in our tradition, there's actually a lot more crossover than we would admit, probably, with Shingon Buddhism because of Keizan, is said to have had a number of kind of different exposures to Shingon Buddhism. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the ceremonies and stuff that you do on these pilgrimages, and some of them are very familiar. And so we, of course, like Dogen, he's our founding guy. The Shingon founding guy is Kukai, also known as Kobo Daishi. That's his sort of posthumous name. And so this pilgrimage route is really intimately connected with his figure. So it's said almost all of these temples were founded somehow by Kukai, and that he carved the image for every one of these temples. In reality, he was born there, but we don't think he really spent that much time on Shikoku once he was an adult. So these are all kind of legends, There are some exceptions. There are some things that we have historical documentation of him doing, but not many. And this next thing I'll pass around, this is the outfit that lay people wear when they do the route. This is like from a Dharma gear shop, I think, so it's sort of like a promo photo. But there's a particular hat, a straw hat that you wear. You wear a wagesa, the sort of circle of kesa that Sawyer used to wear. You have a staff called a kongozue. And so the staff is supposed to be Kobo Daishi. It's supposed to be Kukai. It's like you're walking with him. And this does kind of manifest itself in funny ways because there are all these ceremonies sort of around it. Like when you get to lodging at night, you're supposed to wash the bottom of your walking stick, like you're washing his feet. And so there's so much kind of ceremony. And also there's like a cover that you put over the top to kind of protect his head over the top of the staff. And so you eventually find yourself kind of talking to Kobo Daishi as you're walking in the middle of the woods, and almost everyone reports doing this. So here's the outfit. You also wear a white outer shirt that's supposed to be like funeral clothing. So you're supposed to be sort of ready to die as you're doing this pilgrimage, so that they can just throw you right in the grave when you keel over. The early kind of history of the tradition is shrouded in mystery. We don't really know exactly like when it started, but we can say that it kind of became formalized into what it is today in the like early Edo period, so like 400 years ago. And again, there are all these legends. Like it's kind of crazy the number of like different stories you hear and read about in the course of this. But one that you hear often about like how the pilgrimage started is about a person named Emon Saburo, who is supposed to have been a wealthy merchant, and a monk came to his house unbeknownst to him. It was Kukai, and he beat him with a stick and broke his begging bowl and chased him off. And then one after another, his children started dying. And so in penance for this action, he's said to have gone to all of these temples associated with Kukai to try to find him, to beg his forgiveness. And it's said he went around the island 20 times to all of these temples. And then on the 21st time, he tried going in the other direction. And then eventually he sort of keels over from exhaustion. Kukai shows up and says, is there anything, he's like, you've done this great repentance. Is there anything I can do for you before you die, basically? And he says, I want to be reborn to support the Dharma. And so it's said that, 49 days later, a baby was born nearby with a stone in his hand that says, Emon Saburo, reborn. And he was born into a wealthy family, and it said he gave away all his money to build one of these temples, supposedly. And they have the stone, that you can look at in the temple. So there's a lot of lore, as you go along this trip. So as I said, like almost all these temples are said to have been like founded by Kukai in some way, or he practiced there. Another figure that you hear a lot is this person Gyoki, who is a really famous Buddhist in Japanese Buddhism. He lived even before Kukai and is said to have, he was kind of like almost like a Robin Hood sort of figure, like he helped poor people and built bridges and did all these nice things. We have no evidence that he ever went to Shikoku at all, and yet, all these temples are said to have been founded by him, so you have to take it with a grain of salt. So I mentioned the clothing, and that's coming around. So it turned out that the Godo, so one of the people in a high position at the temple where I practiced, had done this pilgrimage route before. So I asked him, well, since I'm a Soto priest, what should I wear? Should I wear the lay stuff? And he said, oh no, you have to do the wandering monk outfit, which is the same thing that you would wear when you arrive to a temple in Japan to practice. So this is a picture of that, of what that looks like. And so this box that I have here, this is called a keisa-gori. Most Western practitioners don't have these, and the only reason I have one is because it was kind of forced on me. So before I went to the monastery, I went to my Dharma sister Jisho's temple, and Aoyama Roshi, who's like sort of a famous woman priest, asked me if I had a keisa-gori, and I said no, and like they said it's okay, we can just go, and they'll lend us one for the opening and closing ceremonies. But she said, oh no, you need to have one. She was like, it's very important. And so to sort of satisfy her, one of the other people practicing there just gave me one. So this was a gift, and a very extravagant gift, because these are quite expensive. And so inside this is a lacquer box. And when you're wandering around, you would, wear this like this. There's another thing that goes to the back to hold some of your clothes and stuff. And you keep your okesa in here, along with your lineage documents. And there's also like a special talisman thing. So this is kind of part of the Soto lore. And you keep this, when you're at the Senmon Soto, you keep it in the sort of little locker in front of where you do zazen, so it's kind of like with you all the time. And apparently Kodo Sawaki said that whenever you're out of the temple, you should always have one of these. That was pointed out to me several times. So that's what I wore. So basically it's like, you don't wear the okesa's in here. You have this thing, the same robe with the long sleeves. You kind of hike it up so it's not dragging on the ground. There's a special way to tie it up, similar to when you do takuhatsu, like begging. You wear a different hat from the one in that picture. It's much broader. You wear these sort of like shin guard things, and you wear the rakusu over your shoulder rather than down front. So that's what I wore, and I got a lot of interesting looks and questions from people, because it's not like that common for priests to do this. It's more sort of oriented towards lay people. And even if a priest were to do it, they might not, wear the full garb. Plus, of course, I was a foreigner, so I looked extra weird. But people liked it. A lot of people took pictures with me. Some of the places where I stayed, said, oh, can we put this on our Instagram, So it was a good teaching moment sort of for a lot of the Japanese people to learn about their own culture, because they don't necessarily know all these things and distinctions. So the pilgrimage is traditionally done on foot, but a lot of people nowadays will do it by car or tour bus or bike. So a lot of older people you'll see will pull into the temple, and 50 old people will get out and do what they have to do to the temple, will get back on the tour bus, and then it'll take them to the next temple. So it's been modernized. It's relatively few people that walk compared to do it in other ways. And you don't have to do the temples in order. I didn't. Most people do. You can also go in reverse order. So they're kind of a mix of traditions too on this. So Shingon is a little more syncretic, I guess you could say. There are lots of deities compared to our tradition. And it's also historically like been maybe tied in a little more closely with Shinto, the other religious tradition in Japan. So you see that like a lot of these temples are like part of multi-religious or historically multi-religious complexes where they also have Shinto shrines. One of the most kind of amazing things I think about the pilgrimage, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later, they have a tradition called osettai, which is kind of like the local people being generous to the pilgrims. So it was kind of amazing like how much support I got doing this. You know, I didn't really like know much about this going in, but multiple times a day I would have people just like stop their cars and get out and like give me some food or give me money or offer me a ride to the next temple, or you know, whatever, just talk to me. So there was this really nice tradition, and you really felt like you were being supported. You really had this feeling of interconnection as you go. And then there was a tradition around that too. So there were these little, I think I have one here, slips called osame fuda. And they served kind of like two purposes. So I have two kinds. So these ones were from Shikoku and these ones are from Chichibu. But you fill one of these out and put it at each of the temples that you visit. And it's sort of like a way of forming a physical connection with the temple. And you put your name and your address and your age on here. And you can also put like kind of a wish or who you're doing it on behalf of. So I was like, you know, putting all my friends' names on here. So each temple I'd put a different friend's name. And the other function is when someone does something generous for you. So when someone does the osettai tradition, gives you something, you can fill one out and give it to them as sort of like a thank you note, as sort of. So here are a few that I received from other people. These are just photocopies. So some of those are written in English. I think one's just blank. So it's kind of like a certificate that you helped someone. And then, of course, you know, there's incredible natural beauty as you're walking along here. So I mentioned a lot of times you're in cities, but you climb up these beautiful mountains. You have amazing views at times. So it's much like, you know, walking in a national park or something here. And then there's no like central authority, you know, on this walk. There's no one like sort of setting precise rules. You know, there are traditions around it, but you can really do this in a lot of different ways. So I also did, as I mentioned, the Chichibu pilgrimage. So this one's north of Tokyo. I have a little pamphlet in English here. So you can sort of see the map of this one. It's a lot smaller and more compact, and it has a few pictures on here of some of the notable temples and stuff along the way, so you can look at that. That one, every temple enshrines Avalokiteshvara. On Shikoku, every temple has like sort of a different Buddha or Bodhisattva enshrined in the temple. So it was kind of a good training for like learning all the different names of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So okay. One other thing I'll hand around while I'm thinking of it. This is a map that shows all the elevation climbs on the Shikoku pilgrimage. So as I mentioned, you're often going up mountains, and it also has the number and distance. So like as you go this way, it's like the distance between the temples, and then it also shows how far up and down you're going and like where the temples are along there. So it's kind of interesting. Okay, so what do you do when you get to a temple? This was sort of an interesting and sometimes maybe a little bit of a contentious thing, because there's like a way you're supposed to do it, and then there's kind of like a minimum standard, and then a lot of the foreign people would just like skip everything and like go straight to the stamp. So this is like the most popular thing about the pilgrimage probably, is you get this little book, and everywhere you go, they will do calligraphy. They'll put like 3 red stamps and like do some calligraphy, and it's like proof that you were at the temple. And I'll pass these around in a second. But a lot of the foreigners would just get to the temple and immediately go to the stamp office, get their stamp, and then leave. But you're supposed to basically do like a service when you get there, like kind of like our morning service. So I thought I'd just kind of walk you all through the standard procedure of like what you would do. So according to the Shingon school, this is kind of the official way. So all the temples have a big gate at the front, and so you walk through with your left foot and bow just like you would when you're coming into the zendo. There's like sort of a little ritual purification station with water flowing from a dragon's mouth, which is basically the same as at a Shinto temple, and you're supposed to wash your hands and put a little in your mouth and spit it out. There was usually a big bonsho, a big bell. So you'd go up and ring the bell once to sort of announce that you're there. Then you go up to the main hall where whatever Buddha or Bodhisattva is enshrined. You offer incense. In their tradition, they would offer 3 sticks of incense rather than 1. It was supposed to be for past, present, and future, supposedly. And also a candle. And then up right in front of where the Buddha or Bodhisattva was enshrined, there would be a big sort of hanging rope with a bell at the top, which again is very similar to in Shinto, but the bell is a little different. It's called an alligator mouth bell, waniguchi bell. And so you'd ring that, and it's supposed to sort of let the Buddha or Bodhisattva know that you're there. You offer the osame fuda, the slip of paper that you all saw before on the photocopy. And some people would even write out the entire Heart Sutra and offer a copy of the Heart Sutra at every temple. That was way too much work for me, so I did not do that. And then you do a service, so after you've done all that stuff. So the first thing you say is, Uya uya shikumi hotoke o reihai shi tatematsuru, which means, I respectfully and humbly pay my sincere respects and offer my reverence to the honored Buddha. Then you do this verse, which you might not know it, but you all just did. Mujo jinjin myoho hyakusen mango nansogu gakko kenmon tokujuji gange nyorai shinjitsugi. So you get very good at doing these fast because you have to do them many times. But that's the sutra opening verse, so that's the unsurpassed, profound, and wondrous Dharma is really met with, even 100,000 kalpas. The next verse that you do is Gashakushozo shoakugo kayumushi tonjinshi jushingo ishishosho isai ga konkai sange. So this is all the wrong karma made by me due to beginningless greed, anger, and ignorance arising from my body, speech, and thought. I now repent all of them wholeheartedly. So this is another thing that we do in repentance ceremonies, and some sanghas do this regularly. Then from here, so both of those exist in our Soto tradition exactly the same. The next few of these are specific to Shingon, I think. So the next one's called Sankiemon. So we have something like that, but the way they formulate it is a little different. So it goes, Deshimuko jinmirai sai kiebutsu kieho kieso. So I, your disciple until the end of time, take refuge in the Buddha, take refuge in the Dharma, take refuge in the Sangha. And then you do a related one, the Sankyomon. Deshimuko jinmirai sai kiebukyo kieho kyo kieso kyo. I, your disciple until the end of time, have completely taken refuge in the Buddha, have completely taken refuge in the Dharma, have completely taken refuge in the Sangha. And then you recite the 10 good precepts. So these are a little different from our 10 major precepts, but there's a lot of overlap. So it's Fusesho, Fuchuto, Fujain, Fumogo, Fukigo, Fuaku, Furiosetsu, Fukendong, Fushini, Fujaken. So this is no killing, no stealing, no sexual misconduct, no lying, no speaking idly, no speaking harshly, no speaking divisively, no being greedy, no being angry, no wrong views. And then you do this mantra, called the Hotsu Bodaishin, which is the long version of Hoshin, his name. So this goes Om Bojishita Bodhahadayami, Om Bojishita Bodhahayami. You do all these 3 times, by the way. So this is a Sanskrit mantra, which basically means I generate the mind of awakening. Then you do this Sammaya Kai, which is a precept of sacred vow. It's another Sanskrit thing. So Om Sammaya Satoban, Om Sammaya Satoban, Om Sammaya Satoban. And it sort of means like you are the sacred vow, like the Buddha or Bodhisattva embodies the vow that you are upholding. It's kind of multivalent. Then you do the whole Heart Sutra. I won't do that. And then every Buddha or Bodhisattva has their own mantra. So I didn't know this until I did the pilgrimage. So for example, Manjushri here would be On Nara Hashano, On Hara Hashano, On Nara Hashano. So, or if it was Avalokiteshvara, it would be On Narorikya Sovaka, On Narorikya Sovaka. Shakyamuni Buddha would be Nomaku Sammanda, Bodhanambaku. So they all have their own mantra associated with them. And these were, if you can read Japanese, they were pasted on the outside of the temple, so you didn't have to know in advance. And then the radiant light mantra, which is called the Komyo Shingon. Not quite the same as Komyo's name, but close. And this is said to be the most powerful mantra in the Shingon tradition, apparently. I don't know why, but it goes On Abakyo Berashano Makabodara Manihando Majimbara Harabari Tayom. You can do that 3 times. Another Sanskrit thing. And then you say Namudaishi Henjo Kongo. This is I take refuge in Kukai in Kopo Daishi. So Henjo Kongo is one of his like ceremonial names. It means Vajra of the all-pervading illumination. And then finally, you do an echo. So just like at the end of our services, we dedicate the merit of whatever we've done to all beings. So you do that. So it's Negawaku wa kono kodoku o motte awaneku isai ni oyoboshi warera toshijou to minna tomo ni butsudo jouzen kodo, and then you go jiho sanji and so on. So that's one that it's exactly the same in our tradition. And then you do everything all over again at the same temple, but for the hall dedicated to Kobo Daishi. So you have to do all of that twice at every temple. And often there are many more, like Buddhas and Bodhisattvas enshrined that aren't the main one. And some people will do this at like every single one. I usually just did it at the main 2. And it was interesting. So I've gone through this whole thing. It's probably kind of, I don't know, too much information maybe, but a lot of, like I said, a lot of the Western people doing this wouldn't care to do this. And they would ask me why, why do you want to do that? It just seems like sort of empty formalism. And I can definitely see that view. I mean, part of it is I'm already exposed to this tradition and very used to doing those sort of things. So for me, it doesn't feel weird like it would for a layperson who's never done it before. But also, I thought it sort of became an integral part of the pilgrimage. So for me, the whole thing became sort of a practice in interconnectedness through this gift-giving culture, through helping other people. So often you'd find ways to give things to other people doing the pilgrimage route. And then arriving at these temples to really try to do a good job with the service, to really sort of try to lower yourself to the Buddha or Bodhisattva before you, even just symbolically. It doesn't necessarily have to have any magical meaning to it. I think some people see it that way. For some people, it might be a way of, getting some kind of magical protection or something like that. I don't believe in that sort of thing. But for me, it was just a matter of how can I sort of try to lower myself to let go of my ego attachment, in this setting. And so that's what the meaning was for me, because it's a lot of work to do that twice at every temple. It would be a lot easier just to get your stamp and go. So you go into the stamp office next, and I will pass these around. So this one with the plastic cover, this is the one that I used on Shikoku. So like I said, I didn't finish the whole thing, but it's a Japanese book, so it works the opposite way of a Western book. And then this one was from Chichibu, the other pilgrimage that I did. So this one is complete, but it also has a number of like printed things in it. So this is like a sample page. Every temple also had a goeka, like a sort of a song associated with it. So this was on this side is the goeka for each temple that was already printed into the book. This is the actual calligraphy that was like done on site. And then there's like a little description of what's special about each temple at the bottom here that was already printed in the book. And basically the way that these work, I think, often they're kind of hard to read, but they have a stamp that says like what number temple it was up here. The stamp in the middle is sort of like the seal associated with the Buddha or Bodhisattva enshrined there. And the calligraphy in the middle is like the name of the Buddha or Bodhisattva. And then it has, I think, the name of the temple and then the mountain name of the temple. And especially on Shikoku, so in that one, a lot of the calligraphy in the middle was done in Sanskrit. So in the old Sanskrit script that they've maintained in Japan, which is kind of amazing. That script actually died out in India, but they still have it in Japan. And you see that sometimes in this one too. Some of these have Sanskrit, but actually I forgot to mention that most of the temples on the Chichibu route are Soto Zen temples, so not Shingon. You also get a few other goodies. So on the Shikoku Pilgrimage, each temple will give you one of these. It's called an osugata, which is, it's interesting that it like overlaps with like Catholicism. So these are like icon cards basically, and it's a representation of the Buddha or Bodhisattva that's enshrined there, and the osugata, it sort of means like shadow is like the literal meaning. So it's sort of like a shadow of the actual Buddha or Bodhisattva. So when you take this, you're taking the Buddha or Bodhisattva with you, is kind of the idea. And these again have, the number of the temple, the name of the temple on them. And I have photocopies of a bunch of these. So there are multiple sheets, so you can check them out. Each one is like pretty unique, so it's kind of cool. The Shikoku Pilgrimage also had, because it's Shingon again, it has this close association with esoteric Buddhism and the Sanskrit language. So often the Sanskrit language was seen as important to reproduce precisely, so that you could have the like magical effect of these mantras and dharanis and stuff. And so some of the temples would give out these like little Sanskrit seed syllable things that were associated with the Buddha or Bodhisattva enshrined. And then this one that I have is from Chichibu, so the other pilgrimage. So they didn't give the osugata, the little icon card things, but they gave these little things that sort of look like the seed syllable cards. They're almost like trading cards or something, and they have like an image of whatever was most distinctive about the temple usually, and then just the name and which number it was. So that's a few of them on there. So yeah, so often all of these things become like sort of treasured possessions for the people that do these pilgrimages. There are some people that do the pilgrimage like many times over, and they'll have the stamp reapplied in the same place, so the whole like page becomes like super red over time with like overlapping stamps. People will keep them on their home altars or whatever. And same with the osugata, the little like icon card things. And they're said to sort of carry the merit of the pilgrimage with you, and so often they're given away too. So it turned out that the temple, the training monastery where I practiced, as I was leaving, I was thinking about doing this pilgrimage, and the eldest of the daishu, so the training monks, was this kind of really mean guy that no one liked because he would yell at everyone all the time. But it turned out that he had done the Shikoku Pilgrimage twice. And so he, like when I told him I was interested in doing it, he suddenly started giving me all this advice about it. And he said that he did it once for each of his parents and gave them the book and everything after he completed it. So for their sort of health and longevity, which I thought was very sweet. So with that, I thought I'd kind of just move into, again, like motivations. Why would you want to do that? Want to do this? So like historically, there was this idea of accumulating merit. So by doing the pilgrimage, you basically get spiritual benefit that will somehow help you. So I think nowadays maybe that's a little less common, but historically that was similar to like when we do our morning service. The idea was like you get merit from doing that, and you can keep it for yourself or give it away or whatever. So devotion to Kobodaishi is another reason. Again, today I don't think it's so common. It sort of is rolled into it, I think, nowadays, but historically it was more sort of, I think, direct devotional practice to him and his figure. Much like for us, we might feel devotion to Dogen for bringing us this practice that we really appreciate. As I said at the beginning, I think atonement is a really common reason. So a lot of people will have some kind of like thing that they regret in their life, and they sort of see this as a way of, so it's just sort of going through the hardship of having to do the pilgrimage as a way of like overcoming that bad thing that they did as sort of a forgiveness. For other people, it can be like, a way to hope for someone being cured from an illness. And historically, this was apparently really common. So one of the most sort of moving things, I think, for me, when I was doing this pilgrimage is there are graves like all over the place as you go along the pilgrimage route. So back in the like Edo period, in pre-modern times, people would have like a terminal illness, and they would come to do this pilgrimage in the hopes that it would somehow free them from their illness, and they would drop dead like on the pilgrimage route, and the local people would bury them like right next to the route. So you see hundreds and hundreds of graves, as you walk around, like really old, just crumbling, old graves. So you really have this, again, connection with all these people that have done it before you. Again, for me, like I'm a modern, scientifically oriented person. I don't think it's like literally going to cure diseases, but some people still do kind of do it with that in mind, I think. Likewise, some kind of like protection. So historically, again, like through this sort of accumulation of merit, people thought of it as a way to, protect themselves in a dangerous world. And then there was also a big kind of social element. So in Japan in the Edo period, you weren't allowed to leave a certain area around which you lived. So there was kind of like a boundary outside of which you couldn't go. But the only exception to that was pilgrimage. And that's actually what these books were originally for. So when you came back, you would have to show the book to prove that you had been to all these temples that you claimed that you had been to. And it was sort of like your passport, so you didn't get in trouble for just sort of needlessly wandering outside of the area where you're supposed to be. So it was sort of like an early form of tourism, like the only way that you could go on a trip in pre-modern Japan was to do a pilgrimage. So there were a lot of like very kind of secular type things that would sprout up around these towns, like even brothels and bars and things that aren't necessarily so virtuous to sort of like accommodate all this like tourism. So those are kind of like the historical reasons, some of which carry over and some maybe not so much. I think, in my experience, so I talked to a lot of people on this, so that was another aspect that was so fun about it, is you got to meet all these interesting people, both from Japan and abroad, from all over the world, doing this trip. And usually I would ask what motivated them to do it. One woman from Israel memorably said, "I like Japan and I like walking," which I think is a very valid kind of like tourist adventure sort of reason. A Japanese young guy that I talked to, he said it was his last chance to do something meaningful before he's in a full-time job and will never be able to do anything fun ever again. A lot of people said, I don't really know, I just thought it seemed like a good thing to do. One person I met had done it like 37 times. And he said he does it twice a year, every year, and has been doing that for the last, whatever, like 15, 20 years. And so for him, it was just kind of his regular religious practice in retirement. He was an older guy. It was interesting talking to him too, because, he said that the first time that he did it, he didn't do any of the like formal stuff. He just visited the temples, got the stamp and left. And, the next time he started doing the service, quietly to himself. And then the next time he started doing it out loud. And then the next time he started doing all the songs. And, and now he does like everything, and he's like, obsessed with it. So you get a lot of these sort of people that are really into the pilgrimage. And they actually like build this in to some extent. So I mentioned getting multiple stamps in the book. Another thing is they have like special osame fuda, so these cards. So if you've done it like more than 5 times, you get like an upgrade on the color. Like you can use like an orange one. And then if you've done it more than 10 times, it's like a red one. And then I think if you've done it more than 50 times, you get to use like a gold one. So another kind of fun little cultural thing associated with it. And then for a lot of people who live there, it's like sort of part of their, maybe not even really religious. I don't think they would see it as a religious practice, but just a way to practice compassion by giving things to people doing the pilgrimage. Again, that was the most touching thing for me, is that people would literally just like stop and like get out and like give you things, and no expectation of anything back, of course, because you didn't really have anything to give them, other than the slip maybe. It's said sort of traditionally that like by giving people gifts, you sort of like get to take part in their merit. I don't think most modern people would see it that way, but like historically that was kind of an idea. And then also, traditionally it was seen as like, if you give a gift to a pilgrim, it's like you're giving a gift to Kobo Daishi himself, like sort of through you. I mentioned like the staff and people talking to Kobo Daishi. They actually say that, it's 2 people, 1 practice is like sort of the phrase that they use. So he's like literally sort of in some sense supposed to be with you. So just kind of in summary for me, it was really, I guess before I wrap up, I just thought I'd mention my hitchhiking experience here in the US. So some of you might be thinking, oh, well, I'm never going to go to Japan or Spain or whatever and do one of these formal pilgrimages. But you can just sort of invent something here. Carla was saying that she went on a pilgrimage to see Velázquez paintings. So, there are all kinds of ways that you can make this sort of practice a reality, even without the cultural trappings around it. So when I walked to Gyobutsuji, I hitchhiked. I'd never hitchhiked in the U.S. before. I had in Europe before, but people always talk about how dangerous it is, And I think I got maybe 4 rides to get all the way to where I needed to go. And every person that picked me up was just like incredibly nice, and it was such a great experience, like talking to them. I got to ride in an 18-wheeler for the first time in my life. The first person that picked me up was a truck driver. He thought I was in the military. He was like, I saw your shaved head. My brother's in the military, so I thought I'd, give you a ride. And I, explained to him that I was a Buddhist, and he was interested. And then I remember he dropped me off at this gas station. And I went inside to get a pen to write on my cardboard sign my next destination, and he was like, "Are you homeless?" And I was like, "No." He was like, "You don't look homeless." I explained, like, I was like, I'm walking to my Dharma Brothers temple. I'm a Buddhist. He was like, oh, he's like, I was in the military, so he was also in the military. And he was like, and we had to go to these religious services, but I wasn't interested in Christianity, so I'd always go to the Buddhist one. He's like, I don't really know anything about Buddhism, but it just seemed like better than the Christian one. And he was like, if you don't have a ride by the time I'm off my shift, I'll give you a ride to the next place, So even though we have no tradition, I very much experienced the same like osetai thing here in the U.S. And then the next ride I got was from a Christian guy who was sort of like, I think he was doing it like out of sort of Christian compassion. He was like talking to me about Christianity and his experience, but he was sincerely, I think, interested in what I was sharing with him, and he drove me quite a long way. The next person was really interesting. He picked me up in this yellow Jeep Wrangler, and he said that his uncle had hitchhiked literally all the way around the world, like including like all the way across Eurasia. And he was like, he would always tell us stories, and so whenever I see a hitchhiker, I always pick them up, like no question. And he was really nice and interesting too. And then the last ride I got was like in kind of pretty rural Arkansas, and it was just some old farmer guy, and he was really nice as well. And then from there, I was able to just walk the rest of the way. But of course, that being said, there are realities about kind of the way that things are not equal in the U.S., and it might not, everyone might not have the same experience or have the same level of safety that I had. So I'm not saying you should go out and do this. But for me, I was really touched by the compassion, and I never had a bad experience. So for me, in all of these cases, I think the bedrock sort of meaningful thing was this experience of interconnection. As we go to each temple on a formal pilgrimage, you're sort of letting go of yourself. You're letting go of the ego attachment that Dogen always tells us about when we do this maybe sort of uncomfortable, embarrassing feeling ceremony in front of a statue in the public, and we allow ourselves to receive offerings with humility and gratitude. There was like early on when I started doing the Shikoku pilgrimage, I regret this, but there was this old man who was talking to me for like a really long time, and at a certain point I was like kind of like, I want to get to the next temple, and eventually he left and I continued walking, and then like 30 minutes later he like shows up in his car and he like wants to give me a ride to the next temple. But I had just started it and I was like really wanting to like walk the whole thing, so I was like attached to that idea, and I was like, no, I want to walk it. And he looked kind of sad, and I felt really bad. And then I talked to someone later, and they were like, "Oh yeah, like you always have to accept the rides, like you can't say no." And then I felt even worse. And then later I did get a few rides from people who offered them. At one point too, like I had totally miscalculated the like distance between two temples, and I ended up like walking. It was like almost like 10 o'clock at night or something. It was pitch black in winter. And I was like in the middle of nowhere, a bunch of like rice paddies and stuff around. And just by chance, this woman like came out of her house, which was by the road. And I just said like, oh, like please like help me. Like I have no way of getting to the next temple. It'll be like 2 a.m. before I get there. Like, can you call a taxi so I can get to my like, reserved place? And she was like, oh, I'll just give you a ride. and she gave me this like pretty long ride. It was probably like, 10 or 15 miles. Just no questions asked. So lots of experiences like this. So yeah, we accept everything without fear or expectation. And then, of course, too, just walking around, you really kind of blend in with the nature, with the sky, with the plants and everything around you. And then you make all these friends along the way as well. So it's really a beautiful like expression, I think, of interconnection and a great form of practice. So with that, I think I will wrap up. And if you have any experiences of your own doing pilgrimage or any questions or anything or thoughts, please let me know. Thank you. Yeah, Yutoku.
Syncretism here is just 3 or 4 days ago, I was at a Masonic lodge where a person was giving an account of his journey to Japan. His wife is Japanese, but she's converted to Christianity, and so is he.
Mm-hmm.
But she grew up in the Tokyo area, so when they went together there, he went on a tour of the various temples. Mm-hmm. And he has all these wonderful pictures that he showed and descriptions and so forth. But he is interpreting, I mean, he knows almost nothing about Buddhism. Mm-hmm. And he's interpreting this mostly from his Christian/Masonic background, mm-hmm. which is perennialistic enough as to be complementary and not hostile to other religious interpretations. Mm-hmm. But hearing your perspective as someone very much steeped into Buddhism, a few days after hearing this Christian's perspective on the same, mm-hmm. I find quite fascinating. And it does kind of draw up a little bit of synchronicities in other ways too. Because I'm thinking of him, The Way of the Pilgrims. You know that book?
Yes, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's this text, The Way of the Pilgrim, which is from the Eastern Orthodox perspective. And you could just change the cultural motifs here and there, and it would fit very nicely with pilgrimages wherever you find them. Mm-hmm. And I remember that also in India, especially in the Bodhgaya area, there were lots of people showing up at Bodhgaya in pilgrimage from various Buddhist traditions, because that's the Bodhi tree. Mm-hmm. But there were also Hindus showing up and burning incense mm-hmm. at the stupa thereof. And they were on pilgrimage too, because as far as they're concerned, Buddha is actually Vishnu. So, right, yeah. You know, it all kind of weaves together. What are your thoughts then on, I mean, you have a background, you have a master's in religion. So what is your background in sort of the perennial aspects of this? And the fact is you have almost universal application of this notion of spiritual pilgrimage, which is oftentimes seen as a method in itself of spiritual development. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that it's really interesting how every major religious tradition has some form of pilgrimage and how similar they are from one to the other. And then also how it also, I mean, even beyond sort of like, strict sense religion is kind of relatable to completely secular people who would not profess any religion at all. I think that there's kind of a universal sense maybe that when you undertake something hard, you kind of like deserve something for it maybe. So I think maybe as like a fundamental grounding that might have something to do with it. Like I'm going to do this hard thing, and God or Buddhas and Bodhisattvas or whatever are going to reward me for it. So I think there's a certain logic there that can carry over anywhere.
You keep bringing up penance,
Yes, like, yeah.
And even you yourself even pointed out how similar it is to Catholicism.
Yes, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you get, at the end of doing the Shikoku Pilgrimage, you get like a certificate that's supposed to, I think it says something about like a favorable rebirth, it's sort of indulgence. And they do the same thing in the Camino de Santiago. You get a certificate at the end that, basically says, it's basically an indulgence, it's like you've
and you said you have done the one in Spain?
I have not, but a lot of the people that I talked to in Japan had done it. And there's apparently a certificate that you can get for doing both. I think it's given in Spain, if I remember right. But someone told me this. I'm not sure. I can't verify it. I have not verified it. But apparently there's some body that will give you a certificate for having done both pilgrimages, even though they're completely different traditions. So yeah, I think it's an interesting question. And of course, in our tradition, it's said that the Buddha even recommended pilgrimage to the sites associated with his life. Of course, it was probably written in later by someone. I can't imagine the Buddha actually saying, you should go see where I'm going to die. But that's much the same as in Islam, so the Hajj is like the biggest pilgrimage probably in the world. So yeah, they're almost every aspect, I think, of these have parallels across religious boundaries. So.
You know, to talk about motivation, and this is kind of a fun story. So in India, there are sadhus, and they're within the Shibai tradition. And they are constantly doing pilgrimage. That's a full-time thing for them. And I talked to this one sadhu, and I said, so why did you become a sadhu? He tells me a story about how he was married and divorced, and he didn't want to get married again, but his family was pressuring him to do so, and the only way out is to become a holy man.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hear stories like this that might not sound like your classical kind of religious stories, but they're probably more common than not. So, yeah. Yes,
I'm kind of reminded of the whole tradition in medieval England of the Canterbury.
Yeah.
The whole tradition of traveling to Canterbury.
Mm-hmm. Could you share a little bit about it? I'm not super familiar, honestly. I mean, I've heard vaguely about it.
I mean, I think it was it Thomas à Becket who was assassinated in the cathedral, and after that, I guess this tradition grew up with people going to that place where he was killed.
To sort of venerate.
People still do that.
Probably
They still do that.
Do they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They still do that.
Yeah. Yeah, and related to that, in the Camino de Santiago, like there are routes that go all over Europe. So there's like a few main ones, like in Spain and Portugal and through France, but there are older routes that go all the way to England and all the way to Eastern Europe associated with that.
And Italy.
Yeah.
So I was struck by when you were reading the little drawings, the little mantras. So just hearing it, I can't, maybe you've actually compared, but they're either very similar to or identical to things from the Kanramon. Right? Are they exactly the same, or are they just very similar? Maybe you've not looked at them side by side.
I think some are the same. Yeah, I mean,
just it's this complete, interconnection again with Shingon, and maybe that comes through Kazan as well. I don't know. But we kind of think those are exotic things that don't show up in Soto Zen, and yet we do the Kanramon in a Senton Soto, you do it every day. So that was really interesting to just remind ourselves of that connection and how important those things are for a practice like pilgrimage.
Yeah, and of course that brings to mind, another aspect of interconnection or perenniality, the sort of Hindu, essentially, like aspects of Shingon Buddhism that exist in Japan to this day. So, yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting looking at kind of the overlap and contrast between pilgrimage and tourism.
Yes.
And I apologize if you talked about this earlier, I was upstairs, but particularly in the sense of like how people at those sites kind of react when you show the slightest bit of reference, I think, and like whether you're there as a tourist or not, like if you are kind of engaging in that pilgrimage activity in any specific way, like it's a different experience. One of the times I went to Japan was with my martial arts group, and I took a couple of the guys to Sengakuji Temple in Tokyo, where the 47 Ronin are buried, and like that was like the reason I was taking them there, because like it's a martial arts thing, But that's also a Soto temple, and I didn't know this at the time, but they have a statue of Kodaswaki.
Oh yeah, I've seen your picture.
Yes, and that's my picture on But so like I was very interested in this, and it was after I took a precept, so I was wearing my rakusu at the temple, and they happened to be having like a zazen kai, and one of the people at the zazen kai kept kind of like walking back and forth and eyeing me, and finally like runs inside and is like pulling me out of behind her and is pointing at me like, you should go talk to that guy. He has a rakusu. Why? I don't actually know, but who I presume was the abbot of the temple came, and like we talked as best we could in my very bad Japanese, and like asked me what we were doing, why I was wearing rakusu, like if I did zazen, and he invited us to like join them, but like I unfortunately couldn't because we had a whole schedule. But there's a lot of tourists going through that place, but like the second I met them and like explained that I was here doing something in connection with Kodaswaki and my friends were here doing something in connection with 47 Ronin, like they were so excited, and immediately like they gave us a bunch of stuff. And,
Yeah.
like it was super cool. It was just an interesting experience. It was like this. What started as kind of like a touristy thing became kind of a more religious adjacent experience.
Yeah. I think that, as I mentioned, like that guy that, had done it, whatever, 30-something times, his description of the first few times he did it as being purely sort of like tourism, but then he gradually kind of got kind of into the devotional religious aspect of it until he was like a complete, disciple of the pilgrimage. And, one of the books that I read about the Shikoku Pilgrimage said that that's very common for Western tourists that do it. They start off doing it completely with just, adventure tourism in mind, and then by, halfway through or something, they find themselves starting to, maybe I should try chanting some of these things, and then by the end, they're like doing it out loud and really into it. And among the Japanese too, it's basically the same because, maybe we have some perception that they're more into Buddhism, but really not. I mean, most Japanese are very secular, so a lot of the people that do the pilgrimage would not describe themselves as Buddhist, even though they might participate in various Buddhist things. And so you see a huge range of variation there too, of again people who would just basically come up and you'd see a lot of people clapping like it was a Shinto shrine. They had no idea that there's a different thing to do. And basically just, they'd stand in gasho for 1 second and then leave, So there was a huge range, and then you'd see other people that, were clearly knew the whole structure around it and how to do it. Some people would be chanting out loud, some would be doing it quietly, so yeah, you'd get a complete range of variation. And another thing that came to mind as you were saying that about them recognizing you, and that sort of being this trigger. Another thing too on the Shikoku pilgrimage is that people recognize the ones walking the pilgrimage versus taking tour buses or whatever. So they will often see that you have the gear associated with walking, and they'll ask you, are you walking the trail? And then sometimes that'll be the moment when they say, oh, well, here's this, please take care of yourself. Or often at the hotels where you would stay at night, they would ask you, are you walking? And they'd be like, oh, well, we're going to give you a discount, And even at some of the temples, they'd ask if you were walking, and then they'd give you, a hot cup of coffee or whatever, take care of you in various ways, recognizing that you're doing a more kind of arduous, spiritual, potentially, undertaking. So yeah, I think that's an interesting aspect of it, is even if you're not religious, it sort of becomes its own religious practice of it. So. Anything else?
Yeah, Doju, it's such a rich topic, pilgrimage, and it's sort of a formal pilgrimage. It's like a microcosm of, our whole kind of lifelong path, right? And it suggests, struggle, right? Suffering, because it's going to be there, right? And I think Komyo's point about tourism, I would use the word vacationing. So there's, and it's funny because I think, so I do have a question in here. There's a mindset of pilgrimage and a heart set of pilgrimage. I use that term a lot, very sincerely. I do things in my life that other people wouldn't consider a pilgrimage, but to me it's a pilgrimage, when I do certain things and go certain places. Like coming here, I always feel this is a pilgrimage. When I take the bus and the train and the bus, I try to maintain that heart. But the stories you've told are really wonderful about how the process, you can't force it, right? You can't force the mindset, and it unfolds just by doing it, right? So, my question is, through all of the chants, the protocol that you did at each temple, well, two things. First of all, what were your barriers? What were you struggling with on the pilgrimage? You don't have to share if you don't want to, if it's private. And regarding the process, the rituals that you did, how did those unfold for you over time then? Because I found, personally, when you just stay on task and you stay with it, you just have faith and you just keep doing it, it unfolds, it becomes part of you. It actually
Yeah.
becomes like part of your bones. And so I'm curious to know if you could share, if you would feel comfortable
Yeah,
sharing
yeah.
that with us.
So, I mean, to be honest, my time at the Semblon Soto was really difficult. I talked about this in the previous talk that I gave. And so I was so happy to be out of there.
Free.
And my main concern in the back of my mind was that I wouldn't be able to do this longer, because I was enjoying it so much. It was, I really like walking, so I liked that part. At the temple, I had gotten used to wearing funny clothes in public, so that wasn't really a barrier for me anymore. I can speak a little bit of Japanese, so I was able to communicate with people. I mean, I guess that might be one thing, is I wasn't always so, interactions were sometimes a little difficult, because I can usually say what I want to say, but I often can't understand what is said back to me. So I don't really feel like there were many barriers. Maybe the first few days, I guess, not being familiar with this particular form, but it's so similar to what I'd been doing every day at the temple that it wasn't really that hard to adjust to. So I felt very comfortable, I'd say, probably compared to most people. I definitely some of the Western people that I encountered, clearly felt like some of them were, wearing the different clothes and some weren't, but the ones that were often, you could tell, pretty uncomfortable and kind of embarrassed, especially if they had just started.
Right.
I don't know, I think it was funny them encountering me, because, I was this foreigner wearing even more weird stuff than they were. So I think that sometimes that maybe set people at ease. So yeah, I don't think I had too many barriers. But one thing that you said reminded me, so you mentioned microcosm. One other aspect that's interesting about the Shikoku Pilgrimage is so there are 4 prefectures on Shikoku. So I started in Kagawa, which is normally the final prefecture, and it starts in Tokushima and then goes through Kochi and then Ehime. And it's said that, let's see if I can get this right in here, I think I had it down somewhere. So basically each prefecture is supposed to be a microcosm for a different aspect of practice. So right when you start, it's the idea of bringing forth awakening, so hoshin. So the first prefecture is you're arousing the mind of awakening. The second prefecture, so by the time you get to the 24th temple, it's like austerity, you're really starting to feel it, you've been walking a lot, it's hard, you're not sure maybe you're going to continue or whatever. And then they say the third prefecture is like awakening, because you start to sort of come to peace with what you're doing. It's like in Zazen when we kind of accept the sesshin and just kind of let go and yes, this is very painful, but I'm at peace with it. And then they say that the final prefecture is nirvana. So that reminded me of you mentioning microcosms. But I think that there is some truth to that. You do sort of change in your feeling about it over time as it goes on. And I guess another thing too is it's sort of like a microcosm maybe of our Zazen. It's very similar in a way. You're sort of just walking, and at times it can be painful if it's at the end of the day and you've walked 20 miles already. Sometimes it can feel really nice if you're just starting and the weather's just right. So yeah, I think that applies in many ways, the idea of a microcosm. Oh, sorry. Anyone online before we wrap up? No? All right. Thank you, everyone.